There are forces of good and forces of evil at work in the world today. What are these forces? Who is responsible for the good? And who is responsible for the evil? Richard Schaff talks about current events which are rarely discussed by the mainstream media, events that affect us all. This program seeks to identify, to inform, and to equip the believer for what's ahead. Welcome to What in the World is Going On?
Our program, What in the World is Going On, is sponsored by Lincoln Log Homes. We are pro-Christian, pro-life, pro-Second Amendment, pro-American, and here only by the grace of God. Well, what an interesting week it's been, an interesting 10 days, and what an embarrassment so many of us have felt. An embarrassment for our president, an embarrassment for our country. But let's look at some of the headlines that I've gotten in from the alternative networks in the past few days. And let's review some of the differences. An article came to me from Patricia McCarthy titled, "Everything Was Better with President Trump in the White House." Well, I can say amen to that, can't you? Incredibly, only 4 months have passed since Joseph Robinette Biden Jr. was installed as president. And in that brief time, he's done more damage than anyone could have thought possible. On day one, Biden stopped work on the Keystone Pipeline. Now, it's truly defunct, and that cost thousands of jobs. He stopped the construction of the southern border wall, putting even more Americans out of work and opening the border to over 500,000 immigrants so far. These border crossers invited by Biden, they're not even being tested for COVID. They're not asked for any vaccine passport. You know, the left hopes they could saddle all Americans with it. But don't worry about these illegals coming in. Unvaccinated Americans, unless the GOP puts a stop to their plan, will be shunned, banned from public places, or even segregated from the vaccinated. If Trump were still in the White House, there'd be no talk of mandatory vaccines, vaccine passports, jabbing kids. The tyrannious blue state governors are relishing in their power, the power over the people, and destroying their states in the process. If these governors think their constituents don't notice they're diabolically incompetent, they're mistaken. You know, President Trump made us energy independent. Now we're again importing oil even from Iran. He removed sanctions that prevented Russia from completing their Nord Stream pipeline that'll enrich their country fabulously. He has stopped drilling on all federal lands, including ANWR, and put an end of nearly all drilling for our own oil on our own federal land. He's intentionally strangling the U.S. oil industry without regard for the hardships that'll bring all Americans. So typical of the left. So typical. While Trump put America first in all things, Biden is blatantly putting America last. This to the delight of China, Russia, and Iran, our three main adversaries. He's rejoined the Paris Climate Accord, an obvious scheme to fleece American taxpayers. He wants to rejoin the JCPOA, the Iran nuclear deal, even though everyone knows that Iran never abides by any deals that it signs. This is just more proof of his plan to destroy the U.S. He gave Hamas $234 million. Why? So they could start again killing the Israelis and paying terrorists. He betrayed Israel almost immediately. You know, this guy is really a menace to those of us who enjoy a free America. His Secretary of Defense, Lloyd Austin, he hired a Bishop Garrison. That's another radical leftist hatchet man. He's now tasked with purging the military of any and all conservatives. Biden, along with the rest of the left, pretends that critical race theory is not Marxist to its core. Viciously racist, overtly anti-white, anti-family, and pro-communist. But he denies it. Denies it all. With Trump as president, the U.S. was economically successful. It had the lowest unemployment in decades. We were energy independent. Our border was secure, and we enjoyed the revitalization of manufacturing. He reconstituted our military. Trump held Russia, China, Iran, and North Korea at bay, and he achieved real progress toward peace in the Middle East. The Abraham's Accords were a masterful, historic feat. By the way, Biden has prohibited anyone in his administration from using the term Abraham Accord. Trump moved our Israeli embassy to Jerusalem. Of course, he had promised he would, and he did. He accomplished more in his 4 years than even Ronald Reagan did in his 8. Everything was better during his administration, and that's what the left cannot abide. They hated Reagan, they hated the Bushes, but they hate Trump the most. Because you know why? He was the best. But what a difference. What a difference we're seeing. Well, perhaps the sun is going to shine again. I just see recently that Donald Trump is planning some upcoming signature rallies. Yeah? Our former president plans to hold more of his signature rallies in some upcoming weeks, including stops in Ohio and Florida. This according to a report in USA Today. According to the aides, Trump plans to hold one rally on June 26th in the Cleveland, Ohio area, followed by one in Tampa, Florida on July 3rd. We'll be doing one in Florida. We're going to do one in Ohio. We're going to do one in North Carolina, Trump said. He said this during a May interview with One America News. Trump rallies during the 2016 campaign drew thousands of supporters throughout the country and helped him defeat Hillary in that election. During the last 5 months, Trump has made a series of speeches to conservatives, including the North Carolina Republican Convention on June 5th, the Conservative Political Action Conference in Orlando, Florida in February, and a private fundraiser event at his Mar-a-Lago Country Club in Palm Beach. There's going to be some more coming. Boy, I love to watch them. They sure make me feel good. They sure give me hope. They sure take some of the fear out of my life. They sure make me proud to be an American. And some more good news from Jim Jordan. Boy, he's a good guy, He's a congressman from up in Ohio. I wish he'd run for Senate up there. Portman's going to retire, thankfully. Anyway, Jim Jordan said to Newsmax, God bless Governor Abbott for what he's doing. Said this, reported from Newsmax. Jim Jordan, Republican Ohio, applauded Texas Republican Governor Greg Abbott's decision to continue building former President Trump's border wall in Texas, along the southern border. God bless Governor Abbott for what he's doing. A quote from Jim Jordan on Newsmax Stinchfield a few nights ago. He was referring to Abbott's resilience and fortitude, working to overcome the Biden administration's continuing apathy toward the unprecedented border crisis. I applaud the governor and the citizens of that great state. And since then, I noticed just today a report that the governor down in Florida, the governor from Arizona, they're also going to help out the governor from Texas with the border. Florida's not on the border, but they're going to send in some help. God bless Ron DeSantis. Abbott, during a recent interview, talked about inviting Trump to the border. Why? To speak to the people of Texas on the border issue. Harris won't make it. Biden can't get down there and stumble around. But Trump's going to come up and tour the border with Governor Abbott. Abbott noted, and I'm quoting, I invited him to come down to the border to visit with the public about the border because he set the high mark for what needs to be done on the border. Abbott noted this on Greg Kelly report for Newsmax. So God bless Governor Abbott. A quote from Jim Jordan. We need more governors pushing back on the ridiculous things that are going on here in Washington. Like Governor Ron DeSantis, who's done a great job in the state of Florida. We need more of that. Another quote from Jim Jordan. The founders, in their wisdom, set up the 3 branches of government here in Washington, separate, equal branches to protect our liberties. But they also, in our federal system, set up the states to push back on the federal government when the federal government was infringing upon our basic rights. And certainly with that happening on the border, I think you can make a strong argument there So let's hope this moves forward, quoted Jim Jordan again. And what happened the next day? Well, Trump announced that he was going to visit the border. He's going to corner Biden and Harris in a no-win situation. Report comes to me from Thomas Lifson. I'm going to reference it here. Donald Trump demonstrated his mastery of two vital political skills, strategy and showmanship. By accepting Texas Governor Greg Abbott's invitation to visit the border with him, the day after Abbott announced that Texas would be building the border wall, now that Biden, of course, has halted construction efforts, well, Trump has cornered Biden and his private border czaress, Vice President Harris. Here's his announcement, distributed beyond the control of the legacy media and evading Twitter's ban on Trump by being tweeted out by one Curtis Hawk. On June 30th, former President Donald Trump is going to the U.S.-Mexico border with Texas Governor Greg Abbott. A tweet from Curtis Hawk. After laying out how Biden's reversals of Trump's successful policies wrecked things, Trump's going for the jugular. If that weren't bad enough, Biden and Harris won't even tour the scenes of the wreckage they created, or they won't even come down and visit with the Border Patrol and with ICE, the heroes down there that are risking their lives to defend our nation at a time when the White House is doing everything it can to make their jobs totally impossible. Harris's failure to visit the border already has drawn detractors on the left and on the right, especially those who were emoted so heavily over the plight of kids in cages. You know, they hollered about this under Trump. Well, now see the problem. It is, folks, a genuine humanitarian crisis. It's far worse under Biden's regime than it ever was under Trump. Of course, the press doesn't want to show you that. The heartbreaking spectacle of a 5-year-old boy abandoned by coyotes, bawling his eyes out over his tear, it's an enduring image that can't be whitewashed away by even our liberal media. It sure can't. And boy, is that a dilemma for Kamala. If she lets Trump get to the border before she does, he gets the photo ops and the statements, and she looks like Cruella de Vil, indifferent to the suffering of terrified little children and oblivious to the influx of hundreds of thousands of poor people, many carrying COVID. But if she hustles off to the border to beat him to the punch, she looks as though she's dancing to his tune, manipulated into doing what she refused to do before. That's a bad place. It's a bad look. It's rough to be in charge when you can't stand up and you have no principle. You see, now Trump has strategized like a master and left his opponents with no choice that does not serve Trump's purpose. Now comes the showmanship. Never forget that Trump is the most successful producer of reality television in the history of the medium. He knows how to construct scenarios in which people react spontaneously to stimuli that he designed, and to do so in ways that are compelling to an audience. I can't predict what Trump will do at the border, but I'll bet it'll have some highly visual components that will generate emotional intensity. Oh yeah, there'll be conflict, and there'll be moments of catharsis. Those are the elements that made his Apprentice show into the mega hits that they were. And folks, he's going to be doing it again. The border is almost, well, it's on everybody's mind, I guess. The media will try to ignore him, but it'll be very hard for social media to censor all mention of this looming, dramatic incident. Welcome again to the scene, President Trump. Stand tall. We're so proud. You know, I want to talk to you just a little bit about things on the Biden presidency. Pointed out a few things on the Trumps. It's not all bad. There is some good. But let's point out now some of the things that Jim Jordan said to Newsmax. He noted at the start of the Biden presidency that it's the worst in a lifetime. He said this on Newsmax TV on the Greg Kelly show. Quoting Jim Jordan, "This has been the worst 5-month start of an administration, probably in our lifetime. Not probably, definitely in our lifetime, he corrected. Again, a quote from Representative Jim Jordan of Ohio. He was referring to the Biden presidency. Last Monday, June 14th, on the Greg Kelly Report, Jordan predicted that the GOP would take back the U.S. House of Representatives in 2022. We're going to take back the House in 18 months, said Jordan. I really believe that's going to happen, and I think President Trump's going to run for re-election in 24. I think he's going to be the next president of the United States, he said. Jordan said that the Democrats don't have the necessary accomplishments to win in 22, citing liberal talking points that will turn off the voters. The crisis on the border, the fact that inflation is driving up the price of everything, energy, all prices, the price of steel, lumber, aluminum, any supply, any commodity, groceries, everything you buy at the grocery store is going up and up. And they're going to talk about tax increases that are coming. And what have they got to talk about? What do you think? By the way, if you want to just look at a nutshell on what our economy is now, take a look at the price of gas every time you fill up. The only thing they can talk about is January 6th and try to hang this lockdown measure that was put in place with COVID, and it seems to be what they want to focus on because they got nothing else to talk about, pointed out Jordan on Newsmax. He then compared the pre-Biden U.S. with a post-Biden U.S., a stark contrast, he noted. We went from a secure border to chaos. We went from energy independence to gas lines. We went from peace in the Middle East to rockets, thousands of rockets being fired on our friends and our ally Israel, he said. So look, it's like I said, we gotta try to stop the bad policies from happening as best we can right now. But folks, we're going to take back the House, and we've got to hold them off for now. And then we'll win back the White House and put things back in order. A quote from Jim Jordan. By the way, another quote on Hannity. Ted Cruz was there. He noted that Biden's first 5 months have been a domestic and foreign policy disaster. A quote from Senator Cruz. He spoke on the Sean Hannity show on June 10th. In the evening, he was discussing Joe Biden's first months in office, describing the relatively short period as a, quote, domestic and foreign policy disaster. We know the Biden-Harris administration has been a domestic disaster, but there's been no area where they messed up worse than on foreign policy. Well, we saw that this past week with our Biden going to Europe. Within 5 months, Cruz noted it's been a litany of foreign policy disasters, one after another. A quote from Ted Cruz. The first day in office, Biden ripped it to shreds, the Remain in Mexico agreement. That created the Biden border crisis, he added. In the Middle East, he inherited peace. He immediately began to undermine Israel. He sent $250 million to Palestinians and promises to give billions to Iran. Now we have war in the Middle East, concluded the senator. What a difference a few days make. And by the way, we got a freshman senator here, Representative Cawthorn. He's got a little report on this. He just called out Biden in one of the most savage, spot-on tweets you'll ever read. This one's for the book, sent to me from Sophie O'Hare. Just in case you forget the southern border, it's still out there, and it's still an absolute mess under Biden's so-called leadership. His decision to open the floodgates to thousands of undocumented migrants has wreaked absolutely havoc on our border, and for the most part, our media is virtually silent over it. They're not the only ones who seem to be ignoring the problem, as Biden and his team seem to actively trying to sweep the problem under the rug. Border? What border? We don't go to the border. Although Kamala Harris is now making a half-hearted attempt to try and slap a Band-Aid on a gushing wound by traveling to Guatemala and Mexico, find the, quote, root cause of the crisis. Everyone knows that the blame for this falls on Biden's shaky old feet. Heck, even the president of Guatemala has placed the blame directly on old Joe. Hey, and did you see when she was landing in Guatemala in her plane? Big signs being held up. Trump won. Come on, wasn't that a good one? Anyway, Guatemala's president, Giamatti, said in a CB News interview that aired recently that the Biden administration is the one is to blame for sparking the migration crisis. The Guatemalan president said he and Harris are not on the same side of the coin on migration. We asked the United States government to send more of a clear message to prevent people from leaving Guatemala, according to their president. When Biden took office, the message changed too. We're going to reunite families. We're going to reunite children. The very next day, the Coyotes were here, organizing groups of children to take them to the United States. He noted this is completely pathetic, and Representative Cawthorn just called it out in the most savagely perfect way. Here's what he said, and I quote, Camarena is traveling to Guatemala and Mexico to deal with the root cause of Biden's border crisis. Meanwhile, the root cause sits in the White House eating ice cream before his nap time. The truly sad part is that this probably isn't too far from the truth. After all, the media just seems more concerned when asking hard-hitting questions about what ice cream flavor is his favorite, rather than our dismal economy or the nightmare at our border. And I just noted here something that hit my desk only yesterday. Illegal border crossings explode 674% in 1 year. Biden's migrant crisis worsens with 180,000 crossing in May, 1 month. And this year is on track to be highest since 2006. Illegal border crossings have increased for the fourth month in a row, growing to over 180,000 in May. This according to U.S. Customs and Border Protection. They were also up by 674% on crossings recorded in May, when 22,237 illegals were apprehended a year ago. That represented a slight increase over the approximately 178,000 encountered in April and the 172,000 encountered in March. Axios reported that preliminary GBP data from the fiscal year 2021 showed that illegal crossings have been the most since 2006. And you know what, folks? They're coming in, they're not being tested for COVID. They're coming in to get free medical, free education, soon a vote. I wonder who they're going to vote for. Anyway, inflation, take a look at it under Biden. Here's where it's all going. Deficit spending. Prices are rising at the fastest pace in 28 years. Numbers not seen since 1993. Came to me from the Hannity staff. New data released by the federal government Thursday, June 10th, is raising more fears over massive spending, with documents showing the rate of inflation rose at the fastest pace since 1993. The consensus forecast for the core consumer price index, which excludes food and energy, is 3.5% on a year-over-year basis, according to Dow Jones. That's the fastest annual rate increase in 28 years, reported on CNBC. Just thought you'd like to know. And hey, it's not just Biden. We had him on the international scene this past week, but just prior to that, his Secretary of State noted that Joe Biden may lift sanctions on Iran that could fund Tehran's terrorist activities. U.S. Secretary of State Anthony Blinken raised eyebrows on Capitol Hill recently when he told lawmakers that the Biden administration could remove sanctions on Iran without knowing if those funds will help finance terrorists in the region. He was asked by Senator Collins, will you comment today that the administration will not provide sanctions that directly or indirectly benefits the central bank of Iran unless or until the Treasury Department determines that these entities are no longer connected to Iran's terrorism financing activities? Again, a quote from Maine's Senator Collins. The answer from our good Secretary of State? we're engaged in indirect conversations with Iran about the possibility of a mutual return to the nuclear deal. We don't know at this stage whether Iran is willing to do what it would need to do. We'll see if that actually materializes, noted Blinken. Boy, that made you feel good, didn't it? Didn't you feel a lot of security in that reply? And again, folks, our foreign policy, I'm sure most of you watched at least a little bit of TV. You saw our president, didn't you, at the G7, at NATO, before, during, and after his meeting with Putin? Can you remember back how tall President Trump was in the saddle on similar occasions? I want to close with something on a positive note. We need all of the positive things we can find today. This was sent to me by one of my Lincoln Log dealers out of Alabama. You know, June 14th was Flag Day. We celebrated Flag Day. He sent me an article, I Am the Flag. I'll share it with you. I am the flag of the United States of America. I was born on June 14, 1777 in Philadelphia. There the Continental Congress adopted my stars and stripes as the national flag. My 13 stripes, alternating red and white, with a union of 13 white stars and a field of blue, represented a new constellation, a new nation dedicated to the personal and religious liberty of mankind. Today, 50 stars signal from my union, one for each of the 50 sovereign states in the greatest constitutional republic the world has ever known. My symbols symbolize the patriotic ideals and spiritual qualities of the citizens of my country. My red stripes proclaim the fearless courage and integrity of American men and boys, and the self-sacrifices and devotion of American mothers and daughters. My white stripes stand for liberty and equality for all. My blue is the blue of heaven, loyalty, and faith. I represent these three eternal principles: liberty, justice, and humanity. I embody American freedom, freedom of speech, religion, assembly, the press, and the sanctity of the home. I typify this abominable spirit of determination brought to my land by Christopher Columbus and by all my forefathers, the Pilgrims, Puritans, settlers at Jamestown and Plymouth. I am as old as my nation. I'm a living symbol of my nation's law, the Constitution of the United States, and the Bill of Rights. I voice Abraham Lincoln's philosophy, a government of the people, by the people, for the people. I stand guard over my nation's schools, the seabed of good citizenship and to patriotism. I am displayed in every schoolroom throughout my nation. Every schoolyard has a flagpole for my display. Daily, thousands upon thousands of boys and girls pledge their allegiance to me and my country. I have my own law, Public Law 829, the Flag Code, which definitely states the correct way to use me and display for all occasions and situations. I have my special day, Flag Day, June 14th. It's set aside to honor my birth. Americans, I'm the sacred emblem of your country. I symbolize your birthright, your heritage of liberty purchased with blood and sorrow. I am your title deed to freedom. It's yours. It's yours to enjoy and hold in trust for posterity. If you fail to keep this sacred trust, invalidate it, if I'm nullified and destroyed, you and your children will become slaves to dictators and despots. Eternal vigilance is your price of freedom. As you see me silhouetted against the peaceful skies of my country, remind yourself that I'm the flag of your country, that I stand for what you are, no more, no less. Guard me well, lest your freedom perish from the earth. Dedicate your lives to those principles for which I stand. One nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. I was created in freedom. I made my first appearance in a battle for human liberty. Makes you thankful to be an American, and pray for America's future. Goodbye until next week.